Now looking at these wing roots again, the fuel gauge on them, if I take my glasses off they don't look too bad, but they're a decal, kind of a vinyl sticker that goes on there, and a ham-handed guy like me is not very good at putting vinyl on there, the stickers on, but they're on there. Like I said, if I take my glasses off they don't look too bad. Now the next thing I'm going to do is put this little panel in, annunciator in for the ELT, emergency locator transmitter. If you're a boat person, it'd be called an EPIRB. Back in the good old days, the ELTs, when they first come out, there were some small ones that would mount up near the pilot, that he could take in and out or turn it on right there, but as necessary. But most of them were mounted in the back someplace, and on most of the smaller airplanes, cargo airplanes and stuff like that, general aviation airplanes, are mounted in the cargo compartment. They get banged up and they get turned on. They have a G switch in them, which in case of a certain amount of G load coming to a stop and from a forward direction, it flips the switch and turns them on. And sometimes in a cargo compartment they get banged up and stuff when they come on or damaged. This airplane, this Cub, when I got it from Cub Crafters, it was mounted on the floor right behind the back seat on the baggage compartment floor, and it got banged up and stuff. So one of the things I did to it is I put a shelf in behind the baggage compartment above the lower extended baggage compartment, and put a door in there and mounted the ELT back there where it was protected from getting banged around during normal use. And in the old days there was no way to tell when the ELT went off except for the bleed through over your headsets or your speaker through the radio. So if it went off, well, sometimes you'd fly along for a long time before somebody come chasing you down and saying, hey, your ELT's going off. But sometime they come out with a requirement that they have an annunciator panel, a remote switch, remote panel, that can be accessed from the cockpit to either activate the ELT or to turn it off. And this is what this is here. You know, on this airplane when I got it, this is the left wing root cover here, and this was mounted here in the left wing root cover. And I didn't know it was there when I first got it. Flew the airplane for a long time before I ever realized it was there. I was going into Juneau one day and I called a tower to report in at Outer Point to get clearance to come in to land. And when I let go of the mic button, and Juneau answered back, and then I could hear an ELT going off in my headsets and bleeding through on the tower frequency. I thought, oh my God, you know, that sounds like it's fairly close if I can hear it bleeding through on the tower frequency. So I switched over to 121.5 and I could hear it real strong. I said, well, that thing's really strong, it's got to be close. And so I started looking around to see if I could see a crashed airplane any place, and I happened to look up and this light was on, and I realized it was my ELT. Well, this ACK ELT, every once in a while it would just spontaneously go off, usually associated around a certain frequency if I transmit on. For example, the tower frequency for the Juneau Tower, when I transmit on it, then the ELT would go off. And there was a couple other frequencies that do that too. Oh, fortunately you can just reach up in there and push that button and turn it off. Or if for some reason you had an emergency landing or something and you wanted it to go on, you could push this button and activate the ELT remotely. So that's what we're going to do now, and I've decided that one was on the left side. The left side gets kind of busy over there with phone jacks and other things, and so I was thinking about mounting this on the right side somewhere. And ideally, this should be mounted up in the instrument panel right at eye level with the pilot, but then you can see it if it went off and just reach up and punch the button to turn it off or on. But the Cub being a tandem seat airplane, the person in the back seat then would never have access to it. And in the event of an accident, it's more likely that the pilot would be incapacitated than the backseat passenger. And so anyway, I'm figuring on mounting this someplace in this wing root so you can have access from either the pilot seat or the backseat passenger seat. So this is just a matter of figuring out where to put it, cutting out a little pocket for it to slide into, and this part of it mounts right in there. Now this is the second part of that same thing, and it's got a little speaker on here that broadcasts out or makes noise when the ELT goes off, and this was mounted in this wing root here right underneath the panel, and there you can see the speaker portion of it is mounted on this aluminum panel, and there's no holes in the panel for the sound to go through or anything, and the speaker portion was pointed out into the wing root right at the fuel tank. Oh, it would have been hard to hear in the best of conditions, but this Cub, of course, is a noisy airplane, and we're wearing noise canceling headsets nowadays, so it'd be almost impossible to hear that. So I had to try to figure out some way to mount this in here where if it goes off we'll be able to hear it. We'll make some kind of a bracket for that, and maybe put a few little holes in that kydex there for the sound to come through. Probably still won't hear it over the noise canceling headsets, but at least it'll be better than what it was before, pointing at the fuel tank. I got this ELT remote set in there, the little hole fixed for it. It just slides in and out of there. I put that up on the fuselage on the wing root and located where I wanted it, and then I measured it out. It was 5/8 of an inch wide and 1.5 inches long, and I marked it out on the back side, drilled a hole out on each corner, and then just took a knife, utility knife, and cut it until I got it cut out. And then of course the hole was too small, so I used the files and trimmed the hole out to where it fit. Now to mount that in there, I just take some sheet metal screws and screw right in there, right into the kydex, or I could drill those holes out and put a nut on each side, on the back side of it. I think I'll just use sheet metal screws in the kydex, and maybe use a little bit of RTV on the back side of that. Now this thing has to be taken out every so often, and a new battery put in it for this annunciator panel. I put new batteries in it a few years ago, and they just use the Duracell batteries, and the ones I put in there now on the ELT, when you use the Duracell batteries on my old ELT, you're supposed to replace those at half the shelf life of the battery, and the batteries, you know, like 7 years or something like that, they'd have a date on them, and you could only use the Duracell batteries that had a date on them. You had to replace those at half the life on them, but you don't have to do that on this annunciator panel. It's just but I've got new batteries for it anyway, and those are due 2024, I believe. It should be well beyond when I need to replace them again. This is what it looks like on the back side. It just has a little telephone cable that snaps in there, and then that goes over to this little squawker panel here. This has a buzzer in it, and then you've got a cable that goes from here back to the ELT. When the ELT goes off, it sends a signal here and buzzes this buzzer and lights this light up in here, and then you can punch the button and send the signal back to the ELT to turn it off, or to turn it on if you need to turn it on. Now the way this was mounted in the other airframe, it was just screwed on just like that. And I could go ahead and mount that on there like that, but then there's not much point in having that in there, because that buzzer, you can't hear it unless you're stopped and standing underneath it. Well, I want to turn it over and mount it like this. One of the options I could do is just take some tubing and put in here and run a long screw through it, or maybe even just run a long screw through there and put a nut on each side here. But that wouldn't give me much this way here, or I can make a bracket on there to hold that in. Maybe getting a long screw might be the best thing to go all the way through there. I'll have to think about this. But I want this this little buzzer here to be exposed to the inside of the airplane, into the cabin of the airplane, so that you can hear it if it goes off. Well, I've got this ELT stuff mounted up here. This is the oral warning device, the audio device portion of it here, and then this is the buttons and stuff. We've got a couple of screws in here to hold that oral warning portion on there, and I'll measure out. I've got it marked on the back side, then I can measure out where the speaker, the little buzzer is here, and I'll just go ahead and cut a hole in that for the buzzer, or drill several holes in that, something on that order, so that that sound can come through there. This is what I did on the back side. I went ahead and I just screwed it on there. I went and got to town and got some longer Phillips head screws, and then I cut some pieces of tubing. This is just galvanized fuel line or brake line. Must be 5/16 or something, but it's small. Maybe it's 3/16. Anyway, this number 4 screw fits right through it, and I cut those off flush with the top of this device here, and they fit in a little pocket here in this screw hole, so they fit tight down in there, and that'll hold that on there. And then I put a washer here against the plastic, and another one underneath, and these are fiber lock nuts, plastic lock nuts, and of course all this is coming off of there. And I may not need these big washers on the outside here. Since I've got these big washers on the inside, that should be giving me enough bearing surface not to distort this Kydex too much. Well, there's what the right hand wing root's going to look like. I can live with that. There's the fuel gauge panel. There's the ELT panel, and there's the little audio thing. So put a few holes in there for that to come through. I went ahead and took those bigger washers off of that. They distract a little bit from it. And I don't need them because I've got the washers on the inside next to those, between those metal standoffs and the Kydex, so that should be plenty to keep the Kydex from squishing there. Okay, this is what the back side, outside, wing root side, inside, whatever the heck that thing is called, looks like on here. There's the fuel gauge bottom tube here and the top tube up here, and we'll have that. This come up and mount on that, and then a barb come out off of it. Here's the actuator, the little control thing for the ELT here, and here's that audio panel for that. I've got this little cable jumper that goes between the little control panel and the audio thingy, and then this cable here goes all the way back to the ELT in the back, and that cable is pretty long. I don't know what that is. It must be 25 or 30 feet long, so I'm thinking maybe I might try to get a shorter cable for that setup.